with the LaRouche Foundation. Harley, let's go over some of the latest news items because the election's getting pretty intense. The GOP and the Democratic primaries, the battle is getting obviously against the establishment. I call it the establishment party, the snake party with the Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side and many of the other members, including Ted Cruz, on the Republican side. This is getting very intense. The people are basically throwing the bombs out, as they say. What's happening?
Well, I usually, as you know, don't like to talk about the presidential campaign because it's, for the most part, a diversion. But what happened yesterday in Michigan is very interesting. Right. Because on the Republican side, you had the Bush crowd pumping up Rubio and deploying him against Trump with millions of dollars of attack ads, plus the obscenity of the last debate. And the result of it was that Trump came on and was strong in Michigan, and Rubio collapsed. Now, the key to the Trump victory was anti-globalist, anti-trade, free trade policies. It was a grouping of the white working class and middle class and from around Detroit tied to the auto sector and so on that expressed their rage at the establishment. Now, the idea that if Rubio falls, then Cruz will take on Trump and beat him one-on-one. Look, Cruz is another Bush guy. He's just got a different coloration, but it's the same policy. Right. And I think you saw a reaction against the attempt to fix things by the establishment using Romney and Rubio. On the Democratic side, Hillary came forward with this absurd formulation this week because she's obviously been hurt by Sanders and others poking at the fact that she got so much money from Goldman Sachs and that she's opposed to Glass-Steagall. So what did she say? She said, look, Obama got more money from Wall Street than I did, and look how tough he was on Wall Street with Dodd-Frank. Now, the voters on the Democratic side didn't like that message because they don't think Obama has been tough. Obama's given Wall Street everything they wanted. Right. And so the fact that Sanders won in Michigan is a real upset. But you put together who are the people who voted for Sanders and Trump, you'll see, as I've argued for since the bailout occurred in 2008, that if you look at the Occupy Wall Street, the so-called progressives against the bailout, and then you look at the Tea Party, you have a majority in this country who may not fully understand the issues, but they oppose the one-party system, or the two-headed snake, as you might say, which really represents nothing but a continuation of Wall Street looting and killing. And we can end it. Now, to end it, it's going to have to come from outside the election campaign to force whichever candidates have the guts to go all the way with a Glass-Steagall, with an end to regime change, and so on. But I think the lesson from Michigan is that the Bush crowd in both parties, and remember, Prescott Bush worked with the Harrimans, who were Democrats, the Bush faction in both parties got their rear ends kicked in Michigan yesterday. Right. And Michigan is a perfect example of the rage of people losing jobs, losing their homes, losing everything, losing their culture and their towns. I mean, literally, if you go to look at Detroit, it's a good place to kind of do an apocalyptic movie because it's literally overgrown, almost like, 20,000 years after a nuclear war, this is what happened to Detroit, kind of thing. It's scary. It's really ridiculous. There are empty lots in the downtown area of Detroit. You look at cities like Pontiac and Flint. Right. These were centers of industrial workforce. They had good high schools, good communities that have been destroyed, while Clinton is saying, we saved the auto industry. Oh, come on. He's so ridiculous. He is. He's such a liar. I call him the liar in chief. How's that? Well, and this is Hillary defending Obama's policy, saying Obama did the right thing with the bailout. So, I think that then you look at the bigger picture, which is that we're losing ground every single day to the emergence in Eurasia of a new financial system. And Putin is the one calling the shots in the Middle East right now because he's the only one who took seriously the fight against the terrorists. And Obama's discredited. Obama's trying to sabotage the Syrian peace agreement, but he can't because the U.S. military is on the side of Putin. At least some of the leadership of the U.S. military.
Yeah.
So this is a earth-shaking moment, and what most people don't know is just how deep the roots of this earth-shaking go.
Right. Well, I think that the roots are at the point now where, let's put it this way, if the government doesn't fix things, they're going to have revolution on their hands. Because in the next 4 to 8 years, if we don't start fixing the economy and so on, it will crash. And the result of a crash is to say, like Gerald Celente says, when people lose everything, they lose it. And if you want to see the lose it line, it's going to happen here in the next 4 to 8 years. So whoever, if it doesn't get fixed, in other words, you're going to see people lose it altogether.
Well, you know what it's like when you look at a chandelier that's hanging by one last wire, and you know it's only a matter of time before it comes crashing down, right. But you figure, well, it's still up there, so I'll let it go a little longer before I fix it. That's where we are with the economy. By all rights of natural law, this financial system should have blown out, the banks should have imploded, savings lost, pensions lost, and it hasn't fully happened yet because there's still an irrational belief that quantitative easing, that flooding the system with money can keep things afloat. But that doesn't mean it's not going to come crashing down on your head. And it could be weeks, it could be a year or so. Trying to predict what will be the actual trigger is futile when you know that it's the fundamentals of the system that are rotten.
Well, what Gerald Celente says, which I think is a very parallel statement, is that he was wrong, he said in his statement on video, and his latest newsletter, which I get regularly, that he thought the system would have already crashed. But he underestimated that the globalists would lie and the people would believe the lie, that they could even have negative interest loans and bailing in and all these other things. So the number of schemes that these characters will pull off to try to eventually physically get rid of cash so it's cashless, and how they can bail in and take most people's money in pension funds just to keep the banks alive, well, they basically make what I call a gruel class. The middle class is becoming what I call the gruel class. It'll be like David Copperfield, "Can I have more, sir?" holding your bowl over some gruel. And if we go looking through, there's always solutions, though. I love how the LaRouche Foundation has solutions. Helga Zepp-LaRouche addresses the Raisina dialogue in India and talk about, how we should be working with Indians and Chinese for the Silk Road. Insanity pulsing through the U.S. This cycle, all the so-called pundits should hang their head low. It's ridiculous. They have what I call craniocephalic rectal insertion syndrome, which means they get their head up their butt. How can they actually go on regular media and make all these bold statements about how Trump is finished or how Bernie Sanders is finished when Bernie just beat Hillary in Michigan? Excuse me.
Well, and it exposes the weakness of the idea of relying on the great recovery of Obama as a election campaign.
Right. And of course, they're trying to keep the game going longer because really, I think the collapse could happen between now and the summer. If you look at the actual numbers, and you don't kind of get emotional over it, the price of oil is so low that we're seeing a collapse of the oil industry. Derivatives markets tied directly to it. The European euro is dropping versus the dollar. It's down to 1.1 times the dollar, which used to be almost like 2 or so times the dollar just a few years ago.
It was 1.4.
Yeah.
1.4 to the dollar.
So that was like last year.
Yeah.
We're talking about even before that. It was higher. Things are going then, of course, countries like China are going to space and doing all of the things and opening up Tier 1 science. We're not doing it, though. Obama's just shut down NASA. Yeah, because I know you have some really good ones here. I have an article I posted up yesterday from Major Ed Coate, U.S. Army retired Colonel, courtesy of Captain Les Horn, U.S. Navy retired. And it was posted up on another site. What you need to know about Hillary's SAP emails and SAP compromise could bring life in prison. The fact is, what Hillary's done, and she's lying to the public and the media are covering her, and which is showing basically the media also are dead in the water. The number of people who will actually get their news now from regular media sources, cable or satellite, is shrinking like crazy. And people are going to the internet and going to alternative blogs because they really are sick and tired of being lied to, being stolen from, being basically scamtastically destroyed. And Hillary Clinton is so deep, for example, even with Umma Abedin, which is the daughter of the woman who actually set up the Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East, and so tied to big industry and big banks and big hydrofracking of the groundwater, which is destroying it. And she doesn't even want to respond to Bernie Sanders when he says, you're taking money from Democratic governors and oil industry that have hydrofracking that's destroying the environment. It's like, I've been against hydrofracking. And by the way, there's non-chemical hydrofracking ways that don't require chemicals that will destroy the water table. And they should be re-injecting primary water into the Ogallala Aquifer. If you destroy the water table, you kill agriculture and industry, and you start making people get cancer and other illnesses. This woman is out of her mind, and she's lying to people. And, of course, Bernie, being a doctor, is just saying, I'm not going to take this. So even if he doesn't have all the solutions, the reason why he won in Michigan is he's giving people hope, and he's connecting to them, saying, I care for you. But, even more so, Trump said, look, I've accumulated 5,000 companies. I'm worth $10 billion. I want to do this for America. So he's going further. In other words, he has a way to actually fix the system so that Carrier air conditioning company doesn't move to Mexico and other companies. And if they have moved, they're going to move their butt back with updated factories, and the jobs will come back here.
Well, he has a few things that are starting points. For example, getting rid of the TPP, getting rid of NAFTA. These are all important starting points. But
right.
He's got to go further, and I'm hoping that he'll pick up at some point and do that. But what's the most important thing? You've got to take the power away from Wall Street. And the way to do that is a combination of Glass-Steagall and a Pecora Commission, a full investigation into the fraud and crimes that were committed by the major banks during the buildup of the real estate bubble. Right. And that's really where he needs to go now. Now, if he were to do that, that would, I think, cement him even more in the minds of the people who are looking for an alternative. Because the real issue here, there are very few people who aren't opposed to the establishment. Most people don't like the establishment. The real issue is, do you have a strategy to defeat them? And that's what LaRouche has consistently offered. We're going to defeat the establishment. We're going to take their power away from them. And we're not going to let them get it back. And that's what is the issue before the American people. There's no way that we can continue with bailouts and bail-ins and quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, 4. Sooner or later, the whole thing comes crashing down. And so that's really where the politicians are way behind the people. But the people don't know what to do. And those of us who do know what to do have to make sure our voices are heard and that people are getting the intelligence they need. Now, we have a new offer for people on LaRouchePAC.com. They can go to our website and sign up to get the daily briefing. And what the daily briefing, and this is free, and it includes a sort of an overview and then 5 or 6 or 7 of the leading developments of the last 24 hours. And this is something that I'm offering to people listening to your program. Go to LaRouchePAC.com, and you can sign up for this. You have to look around for it on the homepage, but it's called the LaRouche PAC Daily Briefing. And this will give you the ability to talk to anybody about what policies are necessary, because you'll be better informed than anybody among your associates and contacts.
Yeah, that's really good to have talking points. I think what it does is it sharpens up the electorate to say when you're going to these various state elections that are going on right now, we got to 24 states. I think that although they're putting on all the brakes and putting hundreds of millions of dollars, the Republican establishment is not going to stop Trump. I think Ted Cruz is going to implode, and I think Hillary Clinton, this is my guess, I may be wrong, but if the system doesn't indict her, that Trump will make mincemeat of her in the election. And according to the pundits, the white Democratic voters are not going to accept, especially in states like Michigan, Hillary Clinton. She will lose. And so what we'll see is we're going to see Trump come in with a team. Hopefully he will interact with people like Linda LaRouche and yourself and others that come up with solutions that deal with Glass-Steagall, just go beyond just getting rid of the TPP and the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Partnership, and these crazy treaties that get rid of our ability and authority to actually make proper deals, but also get rid of Glass-Steagall. Not only just audit the Fed, get rid of it. Get rid of the Fed. Write off this debt. Start things where if you want to afford a healthcare system that is right for everybody, like Bernie Sanders says, because he doesn't know how to do it, but I think Trump does, start with Trump's 7-point policy on healthcare and start building healthcare centers, eventually hiring doctors and nurses, getting rid of state medical boards, getting rid of malpractice lawsuits, and having mediation, making sure people can train laterally, a whole bunch of things that I'm writing a paper on how to fix the healthcare system and cost less and make it a right. But you have to have an economy. And I think that if you don't get rid of this massive debt, which Obama has exploded, because, by the way, this is on purpose. Obama and the globalists want to blow up the debt because they want to blow up the dollar and they want to blow up America so it's no longer a force against globalism. That's the reason. Obama's there to
the U.S. has become the enforcer of globalization, and that's right. That's where the problem is.
Well, America, when it was first founded, was directly against that, against foreign entanglements. What America has done is become the exact opposite of that now. It is the foreign entangler. How's that?
Yeah. So now here's I think this deeper question that people have to look at is this question of how do you get a population to go from anger to solution? And what LaRouche has been doing is honing this message over the years of the question of physical economy and science versus the post-industrial economy, the just-in-time economy, the social networking economy, where productivity is measured in how fast you can download porno, as opposed to can we feed our population.
Right.
And so what we're forced to deal with is how do you restore manufacturing? Now, getting rid of these free trade agreements is a very good first step, but it has to go beyond that.
Oh, yeah, you need much more. Have you had any luck with contacts with his team so far? Because I think he needs to tap into the vast numbers that we have in our alternative media. The fact that he would have a clear way of actually expressing in a more detailed fashion these so-called 30-second stupid debates, they call it, which is basically a family fight. It's ridiculous.
Hi, my name is Nick Lupo. One word
in terms of major topics. The first, of course, is Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and she's been doing this for decades now. Her dialogue in India, some of the other issues. I was amazed, by the way, when I heard the news that Obama is going to skip the funeral for Nancy Reagan at the Simi Valley facility for Ronald Reagan's library and interment of Nancy to go to some other event. I mean, this is really an obscene president that we have here.
Well, you won't get me to argue with you on that one, that's for sure. There's actually one of the things that we posted is Mr. LaRouche said the death of Nancy Reagan, in a sense, is the end of an era, because she was the connection to her husband, who was not what Ted Cruz and Rubio and Rush Limbaugh claim. Ronald Reagan was a much more sophisticated political leader than people who call themselves Reaganites today. Right. Reagan never was in favor of tearing down the government. He was never in favor of going to war with the Soviet Union, even though the Soviet Union at times was an existential threat to our country. So what LaRouche writes about in there is that you can see by reflecting back to what Reagan was when he first came in and when he brought LaRouche in to negotiate with the Soviets on the Strategic Defense Initiative, that Reagan was closer to the post-war tradition of Franklin Roosevelt, Eisenhower, and Kennedy than he is today to Cruz, Rubio, and these guys.
Exactly. In fact, it was a dialogue between Reagan and Gorbachev that brought down the wall. Wall wasn't brought down because we sort of collapsed their economy or did other things like some of these stupid movies. It was because he had a dialogue, which is why after the fall of the glasnost of Perestroika, Gorbachev took over a place in the Presidio in San Francisco and became a professor of political science there. People have to understand the history of this, don't they? They have to understand.
And the important thing on that is that what Reagan realized, and then people around Bush, not Bush himself, because Bush himself was a fool and a product of this establishment, and he went along with Thatcher and Mitterrand. But what Reagan's instructions to Bush were that you have to tell the Russians that you pull back the Warsaw Pact, that is the Russian-based military of Poland and Hungary and these other countries, you let that disappear, and NATO will not move eastward. And yet, what have we done? We've moved NATO eastward step by step by step, till now you have General Breedlove, the outgoing head of the American forces in Europe, telling the Congress we need a heavy brigade of American soldiers in Eastern Europe with a capability to punch through Russian defense lines. Now, that's a Napoleon and a Hitler strategy, an invasion of Russia. How the hell do we have an American general saying that to the Congress, and no one in the Congress said, are you crazy? You want a war with Russia? Over what?
Maybe they should, this is, remember that movie that had Slim Pickens jumping on a nuke, heading toward...
Yeah, Dr. Strangelove.
Dr. Strangelove. This is the kind of Strangelove craziness. It's like, are you kidding? You've got to be kidding. And in fact, what Putin would know is that having already, there's kind of like a bro-fest here between Putin and Trump saying, hey, I know I can talk to you. I know we can work things out to get rid of extreme Islam and start working on a dialogue to build up trade and modernize Russian industry without hurting America and without, losing American jobs. Guess what? What's wrong with us? Why don't we have a Trans-Alaska pipeline to bring clean oil and gas to China so they don't have dirty coal being mined that puts heavy metals in the troposphere? Are we out of our mind? Yes, we are. Because people like Hillary Clinton, people like Ted Cruz and others that are totally in the back pocket of these big banks and big industries could give a rat's behind if they destroy the biosphere or kill millions of people with a nuclear war or economic devastation. They don't care.
Well, and this is the point LaRouche was making in this statement about the Nancy Reagan's death being the end of an era, is that we were different. Our country was different. We wanted a strong nation, but we knew that the strong nation was related to having an industrial sector that worked. I mean, how did we win World War II? We were the arsenal of democracy. It was our auto industry. It was our skilled workforce. Right. And also the fact that we could demonstrate that the skilled workforce could include unskilled people brought in and trained with on-the-job training. Remember right. Rosie the Riveter? Right. How about all the African-American sharecroppers who were brought into Detroit and Gary, Indiana, and Chicago, the South Side Steelworks, who suddenly became part of an industrial workforce? We had that capability. At the end of World War II, we were turning out 5 times the amount of tanks and planes that the quotas were that were set at the beginning of the war. So we had this incredible leap in productivity. Now, what Franklin Roosevelt recognized is that the post-war world would be determined not by a Pax Americana military global deployment, but by winning other countries over to support the American system economic policies, so you couldn't be manipulated by imperial forces, whether they're Soviet or British. Right. And what Roosevelt said to Churchill during the war is, this is the last time we're going to fight a war for the British Empire. This is the last time American boys will die bailing out your bankers. And according to Elliot Roosevelt, who was at these meetings and wrote a book called As I Saw It, Churchill nearly choked on his dinner and turned purple and said, but you can't really mean that, Franklin. And Roosevelt said, I absolutely mean it. Now, the issue between Roosevelt and Churchill was the difference between a colonial empire being extended with cheap labor, cheap raw materials, and free trade, which is what the British wanted,
Right.
and an American system, fair trade system that put a premium on the development of the labor force of each country. Now, that's where we should have gone. And Harry Truman was steamrolled into going along with Churchill's vision. Eisenhower kept it at bay to some extent. John Kennedy was planning on going right back with NASA, with trying to get around the Federal Reserve, go right back to not only what Roosevelt did, but what Hamilton did. And with his assassination, we've had a succession of worse and worse economic thinking and presidents. And that's put us on the verge of a collapse system. Now, it's good that the system's collapsed.
Right. Well, we have basically, since the assassination of Kennedy in Dealey Plaza, we've had a succession of the takeover of the most corrupt and evil elements within the secret agencies that are basically tied to the corporation boards of transnational corporations and global billionaires to have their vision of the future, which is a vastly reduced human population and a destroyed biosphere, where they're still king of the hill. And they don't care if they destroy major countries or cause people in third world countries to starve to death. They really don't. And
well, you know how you can one example of that, with all their talk about democracy, what happens when voters don't vote the way they want them? They come up with schemes to throw out those votes. They did it to Ron Paul in 2012, in 2012. They're doing it now to Trump. They're coming up with a plan for a brokered convention so that all the millions who are voting for Trump, their votes will be taken away by the way the convention is brokered. So we're looking at a bunch of hypocrites and frauds from Hillary Clinton and Cruz and Rubio on down. Now, these frauds are going to rule until we throw them out.
Well, unfortunately, we're stuck with a system that unless we have a leader like Trump in there, all of our wishful thinking of getting rid of Glass-Steagall, putting Glass-Steagall back in and getting rid of the Fed Reserve, getting rid of these TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, etc., they're not going to happen. We need to not only be us active, but we need a leader that will lead us toward this goal.
It's about time something new came along for better selling and buying online. And I found it.